take however long this is. Hello, everybody. Mid-season review time. We'll get straight to it because I have Dave with me. I don't know which side of the screen he's on here because it doesn't show me when I'm recording this. But how are you doing, Dave?
Yeah, not bad at all, mate. Thanks. Just busy time of year. Well, every month seems busy, but quite nice
Especially
to be
busy with Christmas.
Yeah, exactly that. And looking for annoying that there's no football for the next couple of days, but looking forward to Boxing Day and see how we get on.
I mean, to be fair, it's kind of the bargain with the EFL, isn't it? You get nothing on Christmas Day, but then you get 3 fixtures in the week after Christmas, don't you?
Yeah,
3 fixtures in 6 days.
Exactly that.
But anyways, Dave kindly agreed to come on here to do a mid-season review. Just sort of looking back through the last 23 games. Obviously, I debated doing this a couple of weeks ago, but I wanted to wait until we've literally played everybody in the division before making a proper assessment of the season so far. And this is all, and you probably, and I'm going to tell you this, like what Graham does on What the Folk. Great podcast, by the way. Have a shout out, where he basically mentions all the bloopers and the errors. Where we tried to record this our third time. I think it's the second or third time trying to record.
Yeah, I reckon so.
Because for some reason, either one of our cameras wasn't working, and then for some reason, this idiot here decided to press the translate button. It was translating every single thing we said. So that's ideal. But anyway. So to kick things off, we've now played 23 games. We are on, I believe, I should have probably checked this, which shows how lazy I am. I think we are on 31 points in 13th place in the Championship. I guess the first question is, Dave, if you were offered this before the Coventry game in July, I'm assuming you would have snapped your hand off for it. Well, I certainly would have done.
Definitely, mate. To be honest, I think the season's going exactly how I thought it would. I predicted with Graham earlier in the year before we kicked the ball that we would finish 10th. We'd have a little flirt with the playoffs time to time because I didn't think there was that many standout teams in the division. And I stand by that, to be fair, even though we got hammered off Burnley in the second half of the game. I didn't think they were anything exceptional, especially not to be beating records that, well, Reading have got now, but we certainly had at one point. Points and goals and things like that. So yeah, very much where I thought we'd be at. It'll be interesting to see how much we go for a second half of the season, I guess, in terms of backing from boards and in terms of what type of players we get. The fact that Ross Stewart's back, yeah, it could be an interesting second half, really.
Definitely could be, and we'll talk more about the January window and talk about a certain contract from Mr. Ross Stewart, because I listened to your guys' debate on What the Folk, and I think and I agree pretty much with most of it. But I mean, as far as the season goes, you're right. There hasn't really been anyone who's what's the one I'm looking for? Who's really stood out against Sunderland. I think there's probably little flirts here and there, like Burnley, Coventry second half, both for the second half of those games. When Norwich brought their substitutes on, I thought they looked pretty good. But other than that, you're really clutching at straws to see any game where Sunderland's been battered or outplayed. And I wonder, for me, whether it's because the league isn't as good as what I thought it was going to be, whether Sunderland have adapted to the league well, or a combination of the two. I probably think it's the latter, although I'd like to think that we have adapted to the division quite well. But in terms of the first half of the season, if you had to give it a rating out of 10, what would you go with? Because personally, for me, it's probably about a 7, because I debated between 6 or 7. But when you factor in, we played nearly 2 months without a senior striker at the club, and we had to, what's the one I'm looking for? Clutch and get results by the scruff of the neck in that period. I think the fact we're 7 points above the bottom 3 points off the playoffs. I'm not complaining too much, especially when you factor in everything that's had to have been dealt with.
Yeah, definitely. I think 7 out of 10 would be exactly where I'd be at as well, mate. Just based on the fact that, ultimately we have come up from League One. I think we all realised that we had decent players in there. We had players who were good enough to adapt quite quickly. So yeah, I'd definitely give it a solid 7. Not one of these to sit on the fence and go 7.5 or anything like that. So yeah, there's definitely room for improvement, and I think the only room for improvement really is probably consistency. It's something which we lack a little bit, but some of the football that we play is outstanding. Some of the goals that we've scored this season are brilliant. getting recognition from outside the Premier League is quite difficult. So to be hearing commentators saying that goals like that we've scored should be in the Premier League gives us hope. There's a lot of good young players in the squad and at the club. It's just a case of honing their ability, and I think
Definitely.
Sure, it's something that you'll go on to in a bit, but just in terms of what type of recruitment we're after, I think a couple of senior figures. I know it doesn't fit the model that we're after, but every team that does well always has one or two experienced heads in there, and Corey Evans could probably just do with a bit of help with that, I think.
Well, that's the thing, because Corey Evans, as well as he's done this season, he's what, is it 31, 32?
It wouldn't even surprise me if he was 34, to be honest. I could be completely wrong.
Maybe he is, but I think the point I was going to get at was that eventually, and it's the same with Danny Bart as well, to be fair, that we need to start moving away. We need to start moving away from those players, because they're obviously 31, 30, they're in the wrong side of 30, basically. I make it sound like they're like 67, but obviously in football terms, that is quite old. And we need to replace them eventually with players who are going to be younger and play for the next few years, either before they reach their peak or they're sold. Another question I was going to ask you is, obviously we had a managerial change, or I should say head coach change, because the model we've got is strictly a head coach title as opposed to a manager. Obviously, I'm not going to go over the Alex Neil thing, because I know you've got a different opinion to Alex Neil than I have, but that's fine. That's football. A lot of people, I can appreciate what he did in terms of getting us promoted, and despite my real dislike for the bloke, I will be thankful for that at least. How do you think the club? How do you think Tony Mowbray has done? Especially because remember when he came in, and I think Graham mentioned this as well, that he came in replacing a head coach that, let's be honest, hardly anyone wanted to leave. I'd be very surprised if there was any Sunderland fan at that point that wanted Alex Neil to go. And obviously, again, with what he's dealt with. So I think we've adapted quite well since Neil's left. But that's just me. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, when we made the appointment, I wasn't thrilled.
I wasn't either. I wasn't excited either, I must admit.
Yeah, the least, exactly. He's okay. I still have the same opinion. And don't get me wrong, depending on how the division evolves over the years, let's say, not comprehensively, but let's say that we're not going to get promoted this season. Then it depends what kind of comes about. Is anyone going to stick out? And as the teams that get relegated, I don't think for a long time we're going to get a team that runs away with the championship, because I don't think there's anyone good enough, whether they're coming down, whether they're coming up, who's ever going to change things that dramatically that they run away with it, like when we had Phillips and Quinn and we didn't get promoted after the Charlton game, and then the season after we went on and broke all kinds of records. So Mowbray's done all right. It'll be interesting, won't it? But it all depends on the vision of the club, I suppose. If they feel that next season it's like, right, head down, we must get promoted. 6 months in, if we're not challenging the top six, chance that they might turn around and say, right, we need a new direction. But Mowbray's there. I like the fact that he gets called Grandad. That's exactly how he comes across to me. He's, I'm sure
he's like the granddad who's got all the sweets in the background that the parents don't want to give their kids, and he's just sneakily just slipping them in there while they're not looking, isn't he?
Definitely.
Loves his Jaffa cakes.
Yeah,
absolutely awesome.
He seems one of these, doesn't he? Where and I'm sure he does give out bollockings when they need it, but he comes across like he's a man manager. He gets his arm around the kids, and he tells them what they need to hear. Listen, I'm all for that approach. At the same time, I do like the old school approach to a degree. When it's needed, somebody needs a bit of a bollocking, and I think that's probably why we've got so many prima donna footballers nowadays. But that's a different story for a different day. So I think ultimately he steadied a ship which could have hit a rocky time. There was no. It came from so far left, the Alex Neil stuff, that within 48 hours we'd lost our manager when we thought, right, we're settling into this division quite well. He had a lot of turmoil to overcome. He's done that. I don't think anyone really remembers Alex Neil as such now. Yeah, of course, when a bad result goes in or something like that, we all go, oh, and I hear silly people. Sorry, that's unfair. I hear people with silly opinions about, if Alex Neil had still been here, we'd be in the playoffs for definite. Listen, hindsight's a wonderful thing, isn't it? Who knows where we'd have been? We might have been fighting relegation, and there isn't a statistic in the world that anybody could throw at us to say that if Alex Neil was here, we'd be in the playoffs. So, I'm all right with Mowbray. He doesn't excite me. He never has done. I think the football that we're playing is because of the model of the club now, and that's quite a nice thing, for us as fans. The fact that no matter who comes in, we should still try and play that brand of football. I think it's something me and you discussed on podcasts and personally throughout our time in League One, how we needed a style, how we needed a brand, and we've got that now.
Definitely.
So it's good, solid foundations, no matter who's in charge, I think.
Yeah, I reckon a part of that is also because of the fact we got promoted. And this is where I do have to thank Alex Neil. I can't just be totally bitter. I've got to have a bit of nuance about it. He did well, to an extent he did. I felt the team he had was always capable of getting promoted. But to be fair to him, he did captain the ship, so I've got to give him credit for that. And I think when you're in the Championship, our ceiling is a lot higher in terms of who we can attract as players. Even though we are Sunderland, and that still was never arrogant, in League One, there was always that over our head, wasn't there? Oh, the Sunderland, but it's League One. So whereas in the Championship, people realise and accept how much of a proposition Sunderland should be looked at as. I mean, if you look at a player like, for example, Dan Ballard, in League One, there was not a cat and hell's chance we make that signing because he's never wanted to drop down to that level. So you're right in terms of the whole overall model of what we're doing, and I think I agree with you that I actually like what we're doing as a club. As far as Mowbray is concerned, I think I've said my opinion's kind of stood by this. I think he's okay for right now. I think for what we're looking for this season, I think he's fine. I think next season, depending on what the club want to do, if they want to make a push for the playoffs, if they want to, maybe push for the top half, I'd say he's probably fine for next season. But if, say, the season after that, we really want to start making a push to get promoted, I doubt he's probably going to be the person to do it. But with me, I wasn't inspired by Tony Mowbray. I don't think there was many Sunderland fans that were at the time when all this was going down. But right now, I think he's doing all right. Again, replacing a head coach no one wanted to leave, and he's had no senior striker for nearly 2 months. And actually, even when we look at the people saying, if Alex Neil was here, we'd still be in the playoffs. I think actually, if you looked at it, if we had a striker for those 2 months, I think we'd probably be in the playoffs because there's only a 3-point gap between us and 6th, which is miraculous. Although I suspect as the second half of the season goes on, there probably will start to be a bit more of a gap being formed as the teams that will expect to be. I mean, West Brom, I think, will improve. I think Middlesbrough, I think, will improve. So it'll be an interesting second half of the season. But let's get on to the main man, because obviously we know how much I love Ross Stewart, and we know how much Dave is absolutely fascinated by Sir Ross Stewart. Ross Stewart obviously has been out injured for 3 months. Tony Mowbray basically lost him the moment he came in after the Rotherham game. And he came back at the weekend against Hull, scored when we were down to 10 men, which I think says something about how good he is. If anyone who wants to listen to more detail, go and listen to the What the Fault review of the Hull game. There's a section where they talk about Ross Stewart, and I'll start with what I think. I think with Ross Stewart, I had the opinion that if he wants to sign the contract, he will. Now I'm starting to because, and to be fair, you guys actually convinced me on this, so well done. I agree fully with the model that we're doing, but I think Ross Stewart needs to be the exception to this. And I'm not saying this every single time we have a player that emerges, because I think, for example, let's say Jack Clarke will probably be sold in 2 seasons' time, just as an example. I think the attributes that he has, not saying they're easy to replace, but easier to replace. Ross Stewart is not just in terms of the goals, his overall pressing, his work rate, his height, his physicality, ball control. There's a lot of things that Ross Stewart does that are much harder to replace. You'd be finding it hard to replace 2 of those qualities in a player, let alone all of those qualities in a single individual. And if you sell Ross Stewart, how much is it going to cost to adequately replace him? I know we probably won't try and do that because of the model. We'll try and look at a player that's younger, that has the potential to replace him. But I have to be honest, for the sake of a few K extra a week, if that's what's happening behind the scenes, because we don't know, then for me, the club need to step it up a bit.
Yeah, exactly that, mate. You know my opinions on Ross Stewart. I think at the time...
You think he's the best thing since sliced bread?
Well, mate, I think he's the best centre-forward that Sunderland have had at the club for a long, long time. Let's put that. A long time. you know, listen, we said, crazy how time flies by, isn't it? But at a time when we were doing watch-alongs on podcasts and stuff because of everything being locked down, I remember, if I'm not mistaken, we did a watch-along or a review after the Plymouth game where we scored the goal.
Oh, here he goes. I know where he's going with this.
I'm always going to blow my own trumpet because I said at that point that we had a very, very good footballer on our hands. Now, don't get me wrong. I think me, you and Sean did something and we took a guess, or we were maybe talking amongst ourselves, and we said how many he scored in a season. I think I said 24. I think you and Sean, you went high teens or something like that, if I remember rightly.
It was like 15 regions, something like that. Yeah, it was quite a long time ago, yeah.
Which, let's be honest, it is a sense for someone who's never played in English football and come from Ross County. It was an understandable prediction. I just saw something else in him personally, and just the way that he took that goal, if you remember rightly, he was running down the right, put him from the right wing, pretty much just inside their own half, and put it in the back of the net. And I just thought, there's something about this guy. There's something about him. And to be honest, I think everyone is just falling in love with him because if as a Sunderland player, you've never had the greatest quality in the world, but you have the endearment, you have the endeavour, you have the heart, Sunderland fans will take you. If you then throw quality into that mix as well, you're the
second coming of Christ among Sunderland fans, aren't you?
Yeah, really? Exactly.
That's the only way I can think of to describe it.
And I think you're exactly right with what you're saying. And my argument on what the folk the other week was, listen, in a workplace, when you've got a manager, when you've got a standout candidate, they get paid more than other people. That's just how life works. And ultimately, we'd have to listen. He's been injured, and that there will be experts out there who've got XG data and stuff like that. Not that I'm a fan of XG data, but it would be interesting, and there'll be someone out there who'd have said at his current goal scoring rate, his current whatever goal involvements, blah blah blah, someone will have predicted a table where Sunderland would be now if Ross Stewart was still playing. And it'd be interesting to see that data because I'd imagine we'd be a couple of points better off, and I'd imagine we'd be a couple of places higher. Now, that to me tells you everything you need to know. Ellis Sims has come in. He's adapted quite well. He's had a bit of an injury. He's been laid off for a couple of months. But he's not a bad player. He's just not a patch on Ross Stewart. It's as simple as that. And let's be honest, Ellis Sims was playing, if I'm not mistaken, Ellis Sims was on loan at Hearts, wasn't he?
I believe he was, yes.
So he's actually come from a better footing than Stewart because Stewart was at Ross County and he hasn't hit the ground higher division, of course. But listen, I just want him to sign. And I've got no problem if the model turns around and says, we can't pay more than 12 grand a year basic. Let's say that's what that is. And let's say Watford come in and say, right, Ross, we'll give you 16 grand. Well, if we go to 12 and Ross Stewart fancies the move down south and so on, then that's fair enough. Shake hands, off you go. I'm going to be gutted because I think he's a very good footballer, but that's what it is. Now, if Sunderland are paying 8 grand a week basic and Watford are coming in with 18 and Ross Stewart comes back or his agent comes back and goes, listen, we'd like 12 and we don't pay that extra 4 grand. And like you say, this is all hindsight. We have no idea what the figures are, how far apart we are and stuff like that. But if that 4 grand difference is all that it's taken because we won't break a wage structure, then I think we're silly and we're foolish.
I agree.
That's just my opinion on it. I don't see. Listen, my argument has been that we don't find centre forwards who score goals very easily. We don't find centre forwards who are mobile, create goals, create space for other players who off the ball. Like you say, he's got 4 or 5 qualities which you would look for in a centre forward that we haven't had for goodness knows how long.
And we've been lucky to have a centre forward that's got 2 or 3 of those qualities.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly that. You go back to before Ross Stewart, and it's an interesting one for you because I can't think off the top of my head, but it'll give me a minute to think. But for you, different levels, different whatever. And I'm not saying he couldn't get there or anything, but who would be the best centre forward that Sunderland have had in terms of more than one ability of scoring goals, I think, that we've had since Ross Stewart?
You're struggling then, though. I mean, I suppose another forward I could think of that comes close in that sense is Madja, and I still think Stewart's a better player than Madja.
Totally agree with that. Yeah,
to a degree. Jermaine Defoe, I suppose, even though that was in the Premier League, his first spell.
But his quality would have been finishing, wouldn't it?
Exactly. Yeah, he was
his
in
legs
his
and
30s
stuff
by the time he came here. It's the first time. So I think, but beyond that, you're struggling. I mean, Christ, we've had strikers like, I don't know, James Vaughan or Will Grigg, even like Charlie Wyke, and obviously, bless his soul, good that he's actually alive and playing. But, you know, when you compare the two of them, it's night and day, even though Charlie Wyke in his last full campaign scored 31 goals, which isn't to be sniffed at, but you have to play a certain way to facilitate that. Whereas Stewart, it's very rare. That's my point. The qualities that Stewart's got and the consistent blend of qualities that he has, that's very rare to find in a striker. And I think in this case, if what you're right, because again, like we said, we don't know what's going on. This was all hypothetical. We can only speculate. But for me, if Stewart is only wanting a couple of grand more and Sunderland are unwilling to pay that, as someone who's a big fan of the model, this is the first time I'd really criticise the regime and say, well, even if you look at it from a financial perspective, that if Stewart is only asking for a couple of K extra, if you gave Stewart that extra couple of K, let's say in a week's time, we say Ross Stewart signed a 3.5-year deal, for instance, and he has a really good second half of the season, that leaves you in a better position to command what fee you can then demand of clubs that want to buy him. And if, say, for example, we've allegedly slapped a £10 million price tag. The sources that this has come from isn't the most what's what I'm looking for.
Reliable.
Hasn't been historically the most reliable or accurate. But let's assume it's true for a moment. £10 million price tag slapped on for Ross Stewart, because I think we probably will activate the 1-year extension if he doesn't sign a contract. So £10 million. Now imagine what he would be worth if he had, say, 3.5 years left on his deal. That you'd instantly be looking at least 15, but probably even higher, to be honest. You're probably looking at maybe double that. And people can say that's ridiculous, but that's how football is. Transfer fees are inflated these days. And for a player that's got the qualities Ross Stewart has, why shouldn't we be asking that sort of money? Why shouldn't we? Worse players have gone for that sort of money, put it that way. So for me, financially, it would make sense to do it. Now, again, that's easy for me to say. It's not my money that's been thrown at the table. But I would like to hope that the club and the regime know what type of player they've got on their hands here, and that should be very determined to make sure that they don't lose him.
Definitely, mate. And I think looking back on it, the best centre forward, and they're completely different centre forwards, but for Ross Stewart, and it's a different time and whatever, but the best centre forwards that we've had probably since then, apart from Defoe, as you've said, it's probably going back to Asamoah Gyan and Darren Bent. And I know.
And how long ago was that? A dozen years ago.
Exactly that. And listen, you know, we can all say what we like about Darren Bent and how he left for the money, and that's absolutely fine. He ruined his own career. He upset us, but he ruined his own career. It's as simple as that. Whether he likes to hear that or not, it's true. Still came out with a couple of grand out of it, so he's done all right. But you know, that's how long it is since we've had a centre forward who we not only want to see play, but that we fully believe in, that we know will affect a game positively, that we go into a game and we think he's going to score today. You know, imagine that luxury. And like you say, where does that, you talk about all the younger ones who we've potentially been linked with before, and I know they do more work behind the scenes, but if there was anyone half respectable kicking about in an Everton youth team, a Liverpool youth team, trust me, they'd be known about. It's a centre forward who was scoring goals regularly, who was creating this, that, and the other. We'd know about it. You hear about the likes of, is it at Villa, Keenan Davis, Cameron Archer.
Yeah.
You know, there's no big noise about them. And who's to say that they wouldn't come in and fit perfectly into our setup and whatever. But who was the centre forward that we're linked to and he went elsewhere? On loan.
Broadhead?
No, not Nathan. There was someone else, and I can't. It might have been Villa as well, but he decided he's went to Preston instead of us, and I don't think
no, that was Cameron Archer.
Was it Cameron
last
Archer?
year? I think it was last January. We were looking at Cameron Archer, and he decided to go to Preston. Yeah,
and obviously they completely play a different style of football to us. We understand that, and there's nothing to say that just because it's not working there, it wouldn't work with us. But I just think it's so big the risks in terms of. And like I say, we're talking as if this is $4,000 difference. If it's $12,000 difference, I understand the need to stick to the model.
Yeah,
but if we're talking about 20% or 25%, for the risk that it would take to replace him, I just do not see that that's a risk worth taking personally. So
exactly. I mean, I think obviously I've been keen to emphasise that negotiation has to come from both sides. Stewart and his agent have to come to the table, but as you pointed out on the podcast the other day, that Ross Stewart doesn't. I mean, well, this is just. I mean, either this is true or he's an exceptionally good actor, one of the two. But he looks like he really enjoys being here. He looks like he doesn't want to leave. But obviously, at the same time, I can't help but think of a Madger situation in the back of my head where the agent turns the player's head, and the player doesn't seem to want to stay enough just to go against his agent. And I know that the agents have a lot of power in football, but the way I always look at it, and this is idealistic these days, that the agent should work for the player, not the other way around. But that's how it is. It depends. You're right, though. It does depend on the difference. If Ross Stewart is asking, as you said, Ross Stewart's asking for 12k extra, then it's the job of both of them to meet in the middle and maybe go, right, okay, we can't offer you this. Or if you say, we'll stick to the wage structure with this, but you'll get a heavily incentivized goal bonus at the end of the season if you reach a certain tally. I don't know how it would work. And I'm hoping that's what's happening behind the scenes, but again, we don't know. But with Ross Stewart, safe to say he is the best thing since sliced bread, and we hope he signs a contract. So,
yeah, and another quick point on it, just before you move on, one thing that you've always been a staunch advocate for is how big of a football club Sunderland are. A lot of opposition fans won't like the idea of that, but ultimately playing at Sunderland is quite a big thing.
it is,
and
yeah.
Boxing Day, you will see the Stadium of Light at the level, probably because everyone's half pissed up, and also because it's Boxing Day. But you will see the Stadium Light. It's on TV as well, with over 40,000 people in that place, and it'll be rocking, and there's no doubt about that. And there has to be an element of Ross Stewart who, in his head, who thinks to himself, right, where am I going to go where I'm going to actually experience more than this? Now, of course, if he gets the opportunity to go and play European football, if he gets the opportunity to go and play UEFA Cup or Europa League as we are now, if he gets to go and play in front of Anfield, if whatever, I understand the need for him to jump ship and further his career, especially if it's a bigger pay packet.
Yeah, if it's for someone that's bigger than Sunderland, I can accept it.
What I don't understand is, especially if the figures are that marginal in terms of football and sense, $4,000 a week to me and you is a lot of money. But if we're talking about things like that, then what we've got to take into account is, going to play in front of Watford. What's the point? It's yeah, okay. If the money's $12,000 a week more, I understand why you'd go to Watford. I totally understand that. But Sunderland will try, because of the model, we will try to challenge to get promoted to the Premier League, which is no better than what Watford are going to do, than what Burnley are going to do, so on and so forth. But Burnley will have 20,000 fans there. He has the potential to play in front of 48,000 fans week in, week out. I think that's got to be a massive draw and put Sunderland in the driving seat for, listen, Ross, we're not going to give you 16 grand like Watford, but we will do you 12 and we'll get this place absolutely rocking and then we'll get you in the Premier League. I think that's...
It ultimately comes down to what does the player value more, doesn't it?
Exactly.
So I think, I mean, again, you're right. I have been a big advocate of how big a club Sunderland are and I think the fact we've been on Sky like 12 times this season, I think proves that. I'm bearing in mind, we've just come up from League One after 4 years down there, and yet we're on Sky every other week. There's got to be a reason for that. So I think, like I said, we don't know Ross Stewart. We don't know what Ross Stewart's thinking in his head, but hopefully, I'd like to hope that he's really wanting to stay. I mean, it might be. Okay, I'll ask you this then. The final question on Ross Stewart before we move on, because I feel like we spent like about a third of this on Ross Stewart, but he's that important. Do you think, say he doesn't sign the contract, at least not yet, Do you think he'll leave in January?
Oh,
I don't, but I wouldn't be shocked if he did.
Yeah, exactly that. I have a bad feeling about it. I have a bad feeling, but that comes from years of hurt with other players who jump ship. So I have a bad feeling, but I would like to think, especially with that extra year's activation clause that we've got, I would like to think that if he does go in January, we get an inflated transfer fee.
Yeah.
Now, that to me, I would say, and people will laugh at me and people will give you some comments and whatever, 10 million's a ridiculous value, blah, blah, blah. Listen, we watch him week in, week out. We know how much we've missed him from the time that he's been off. 10 million would be cheap. So if an offer for 15 million came in, then I think he'd probably go. And that's understandable, but Sunderland would be £15 million better off. I think I don't think he does go in January. I think that's trying to think with my head. There's a little part of me thinks that I don't like the situation whatsoever, but I don't think he goes in January.
No, like I said, I don't. But if he did, well, this club doesn't surprise you with quite a lot of things, to be fair. But there you have it. But anyway, well, let's hope Ross Stewart does sign. And as you mentioned, we have got Ellis Sims as well at the moment, who I personally quite like. But I think it's just that a lot of people don't seem to rate him, as rating him because he's not Ross Stewart, which for me isn't. I mean, not you particularly, but I mean, like, for me that isn't fair. I think you've got to look at him on his own merit and look at him, and I think there is attributes within him that suggest he will be a very good footballer. And bear in mind, he's 21 years old or 22 at oldest. So I have a feeling that there's a chance we could maybe go for him permanently in the summer. But okay, to move on. I was going to say first 31 games, but that's the amount of points we have. All right, first half of the season. Who stood out to you, player-wise, both positively and negatively, if you can think of any?
I think one. In fact, no. There's more than one. I'm not gonna do that an injustice.
All right, then just name the players that stood out to you. Then
really interestingly, because I think it's a part of our team which certainly needs changing. But I think defensively from the midfield is where we need to improve, not necessarily the defence as a whole. For me, Danny Bart has been absolutely immense. Everything we were told that he would be. Is fantastic. I think fantastic for the younger lads, and he's been brilliant. And one which, if you were listening to the whole review, one thing that I'm even going to stop, and I'm going to promise myself to stop, because I think he's finally found his position and he's finally doing what he does. I'm not going to say he's a limited footballer anymore. One person who's just impressed me consistently this season.
I think I know where this is going. Go on.
It's Luke O'Nien. I listen, I'm a convert. I don't want to see him playing centre midfield and trying to play defence splitting passes. I don't want to see him trying, although he does it quite well nowadays because he's got a little bit more time on the ball. I don't want to see him trying to shoot from outside the box and bend it in the top corner. It's just not his game. But Luke O'Nien has become a very, very accomplished championship defender, I think. And considering, like I say, I think one of the weakest parts of our team is defensively. For them to stand out so much probably shows you that we could have conceded a lot more goals without them too. After that, Amad Diallo took a few games to adjust, but I think he fits in well now.
Yeah,
he's definitely the luxury type of player that Sunderland have never took a risk on in previous years of supporting Sunderland. He kind of, as they say in football, he cheats. He doesn't mind putting his challenges in when he's 10, 15 yards away from the ball, but he tries to keep himself in that space for when we receive the ball to get us on the front foot. And he's just quite a classy player. You can see why he went for so much money.
That's the thing. The only negative in that, and I've accepted this, there's no way he's here next season. And that's just how it is. He's going to want to be better than the championship. There's a high chance we're not going to get promoted. So there's a high chance he's not here next season. So hopefully he's not recalled next month and we've got him for another 6 months.
Yeah, definitely. And other than that, I don't think that from a, if you want to say a negative point of view, people who haven't impressed me as much, but I don't think anybody's been woeful. Anyone who I can look at and go, nah, they're absolutely ridiculous. I've maybe expected a little bit more from Dan Neil, but kind of he's shown it in glimpses. He's shown what he's available, what he brings.
We have to remember with Dan Neil, sorry to interrupt you, but do we remember with Dan Neil as well that last season was his first year of senior football,
exactly,
I think.
Exactly.
So that he's going to take, and that was in a league where we probably were given more time on the ball to try and impact the game. I think from another point of view, Alex Pritchard, but that's only because I've seen him play to much better standards, and I think he'll admit that himself. Jack Clark's another one. I think Jack Clark's looked. I know recently he's been a bit off, but I think in general he's looked really, really good this season. And I think, to blow my own trumpet, because you did it earlier and I'm going to do it here. For me, I said in the summer that I believe there was a player in Jack Clark, when not as many people did. Doesn't mean there weren't people who didn't believe in him, but I think there weren't people who did believe in him. But I felt that give him 4 months, give him a place to settle down, call home, and I think you'll see a better player. And I think that's what's happened. And Patrick Roberts, I'd like to see a bit more, but I can't remember the last time. Just sort of start moving along. I can't remember the last time we've had this many flair options, I guess, or many, quite frankly, good options. Because we know every time for every good player, there seems to be 2-3 players that aren't exactly up to the same standard. So whereas now, I think we have actually got the standard.
Yeah, definitely. And just another one who I think warrants a little mention, and simply because of the fact that he doesn't get spoken about means he's doing a good, consistent job, and that's probably Anthony Patterson. He's made the number 1 shirt his own, and while I don't think he's exceptional, and I don't think he's been doing a solid 8 out of 10 job every week, I think he's been a solid 7 out of 10 most weeks, 6.5, and he's just consistent. He's definitely becoming a little bit more assertive. So yeah, I think a little special shout out to Anthony Patterson, to be fair.
Fair enough. So I guess to sort of start finishing it up, because I know people don't want to listen to my voice for this long. I'm amazed if you're still watching, to be honest. What's your hopes and expectations for this? Well, actually, I'll tell you what then. We'll talk very, very quickly about January and then talk about the rest of the season before wrapping it up. So for January, where would you want to see us strengthen? What would you want to see us bring in that makes you think, right, I'm very, very happy with the options that we've now got at our disposal?
2 centre midfielders, athletic, strong, box to boxes. And a bit more experienced. I've got no problem with whether they're 24 and have a resaleable value or anything like that, because that's the model. But I think Abdullah Bar eventually will turn into one of those. He's still a little bit weak at the minute. He's still adapting to English football, and I understand that the kid's 19-year-old. But yeah, I've been trying to think for a couple of weeks of where you go and where you get that type of player from. You're probably looking around, and I don't know who's on whose books, but players who are at the lower end of the Premier League who have them attributes, probably from the likes of like a Bournemouth or something like that, who can play. I'm trying. Who was the lad? And I don't know where he's at now, actually. But he probably wasn't the most technically gifted footballer, but he did have a little spell in the Premier League and do all right. And then he moved to the Championship. Was it Billing at Bournemouth, I think?
Possibly.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Billing was at Huddersfield, I think, before moving to Bournemouth, but I might be wrong on that.
Yeah, it was either one way or the other anyway, but whichever one it was, he was a big, strong, athletic centre midfielder. Listen, going back, I know he broke our hearts and stuff, I think it was Moyes who broke our hearts in more than one way. Oh, look at that. Dave getting digs in against former managers who he absolutely hates. Surprised you haven't mentioned.
Wow, what a surprise this is. I wonder who this manager is.
Dare I say, someone like a Jan Mvia. Now, listen, don't get carried away. The bloke's still playing Champions League football, and he's too old to fit.
No, but I know what you mean. Someone of that sort of ilk.
But that type of footballer who can come in, say, listen, lads, I've been here, I've done that. Give me the ball, and just simply because I think Corey Evans is doing a sterling job, but his legs have gone from underneath him.
Exactly.
He he lasts 60 minutes a game at best, at very best. And I think probably the 15-minute interval at half time is probably the worst thing for Corey Evans, because I think his legs are probably seasoning up, and if he could do an hour straight, he'd probably be all right. But I think that 15 minutes breaks him, if I'm honest. So yeah, a couple of centre midfielders, and I'd be like, I tell you what, let's have a little flirt with the playoffs. Who knows? But listen, Michael, one thing that I said at the beginning was consistency. If we suddenly went on a 10-game run with 4 wins in there and 6 draws, all of a sudden you're in the mix.
The picture changes. That's the thing. The league is that congested at the moment that a couple of results either way could make a huge difference, can't it?
Exactly that. And listen, it's something that we've had back-to-back wins once this season. You know, if you can get three games on the bounce, anything's possible. But I'd love to see them 2 centre midfielders just for when we've got second half against Burnley, anything like that. I'd love to see those 2 centre midfielders who can just pull the team together more narrow, defensively, and just go, listen, lads, we'll get to play our football, but for the next 15 minutes, sit in, make it ugly, kick them high up the pitch, and then we'll get back on the ball, and then we'll go and do our thing. And I'd love to see that.
So would I. I think another striker, at least, as well, is one that is the one that we definitely need, because we've only got Stewart and Sims at the moment. We need another one if Stewart stays, and if Stewart goes, we need another 2. But again, time will tell on that. The last question before we do start to wrap it up is, what would your expectations? How do you think let's say you've got a crystal ball and you go 5 months into the future, how do you see the second half of the season going? Obviously, this is dependent on injuries, or suspensions, or players leaving or whatever. And by the way, hopefully Elliot Embleton gets back soon. Forgot to mention that. But for me, the way I look at it is, at the minute we're 7 points above the bottom 3. I don't think, providing we maintain the level we're at the moment, there's no danger, in my opinion, of us getting relegated. I'm not going to rule it out completely, because I said that last time in the Championship and I ended up looking like an idiot at the end of it. I think it's unlikely we get relegated. I think you said this as well. I think there will be worse teams than Sunderland down the bottom. Do you think we'll be looking closer to the playoffs, relegation zone, or do you think we're going to be slap bang in the middle come May?
I'm literally really happy. 23 games in, I'm really happy with my prediction before there was even a ball kicked.
What did you say, 10th?
10th with a little flirt of playoffs. So
not wrong, to be fair.
Yeah, I'm more than happy with that, and I don't see it changing. I still don't see, even if we kept this squad, and listen, worst case scenario for us has probably happened. We've played for 2 months without a centre forward.
And we've came through it okay, haven't we?
Exactly that. We've still won games. It's not as if we haven't won games where we think, damn, we're going to go on a 10-game losing run and we're going to get drawn right back into it. I think we'll still win games because of the style of football that we play. So yeah, I'm really, really happy, which is unbelievable, because I am a bit of a gambling man, if I'd have put money on it, I'd have been so far wrong, it was unbelievable. But yeah, I'm happy with 10th and with a little chance of people going, do you want to know something? We might just scrape in the playoffs here. So yeah, I think I'll stick with that.
Do you know what we know in typical for Sunderland is that we'd end up getting promoted to the Premier League this year when nobody expects it at the club. We scrape into the playoffs and the momentum carries us through to the Prem. That's when the real money has to be spent on football. That's the problem. But anyway, yeah. If there's anything I've forgotten, because knowing me, I completely butcher and forget the odd thing to mention here and there. But yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed this mid-season review, and we'll see where we are. See if we can get Dave to come jump back on in mid-May or jump back on at the end of May when we've won at Wembley in the playoff final and we're back in the Premier League where we belong. But yeah, thanks very much. Thanks very much, Dave, for coming on. It's been nice to have a nice little sitting 40-odd minute chat when I wasn't putting the translation thing on, or I wasn't looking exceptionally blue on my camera, which is just mental.
That's been brilliant, mate. Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure.
No, it is. Thanks very much. And guys, as you know, I keep saying this. Hopefully, I've done enough to get a subscription from you. If you aren't already subscribed, because the analytics, and I hate doing this, to be honest, but you need to mention it. The analytics show that I think around half of the people who watch aren't subscribed. So if you could hit the subscribe button, that'd be massively appreciated. And yeah, and last thing to say is, Happy Christmas, everybody. Have a happy, healthy Christmas with your families. Enjoy the Christmas dinners, because that's always the best bit. I'm sure Dave will be testament to this, working in a pub, making food. But yeah, happy Christmas, everyone. Have a happy, healthy time with your families, and we'll see you on Boxing Day against Blackburn Rovers. Take care.